So welcome to this webinar. This is the Power BI and the Power of Marketing Data webinar. I'm Neil Wilkins, and thank you so much for coming along to this particular session. If you're live on this session, we're going to be using the chat facility to get any questions input to me for the Q&A at the end. If you're watching this on catch up or listening to this on catch up or on the podcast, you can use the message facility underneath this particular broadcast and ask any questions or DM me, and I will endeavour to get back to you with any links or answers to your questions if I can. If not, I will send you to somebody who can certainly help you. So this is a really, really important topic within the subject of marketing, because without powerful data, without powerful intelligence, without powerful information that can really help you to make good decisions, you really are just flying by the seat of your pants. And this is a dangerous way to be doing marketing, because you've got no evidence of the things that you're doing that are working and things that you need to improve. So data is absolutely everything within the marketing activities that you do. So what we're going to do through this session is explore some of the ways that you can start to begin to pull together data from various different sources that is relevant to you, layer that data up, and then use it to inform your decision making. So it's those three kind of core elements really that allow us to use data to best effect. So when we talk about marketing data, what actually are we talking about? Well, when I talk about marketing data, I like to sort of use the phrase big data. You've probably heard this one if you've been watching sort of the marketing press in recent years, because this whole concept of big data, this whole thing about drawing together data, numbers, information from a variety of sources, and then using those variety of sources to inform your decision making. This is really what we're talking about here. For me, this is a really nice little quote. In marketing, big data compromises gathering, analysing and using, and we'll talk about the using bit in a minute, massive amounts of digital information to improve business operations. And obviously, in lots of cases, if you are working in a customer-centric form of marketing, so you're looking to put customers right at the heart, this kind of approach, this kind of use of big data allows you then to take a 360-degree view of your target audience. In other words, everything that you could possibly want to know about your target customer, in theory, is available to you. So this is about gathering it, analysing it, and then using it to make better decisions, to improve the operations, to become more efficient, and to really kind of optimize pretty much everything that you do. So it is a big, bold starting place. It's a big, bold ambition, but it is something that I think a lot of us now are starting to see some really good gains from as we start to use data in the marketing that we do. Now, what does this actually mean for us? Because we can, of course, as we know, carry on doing marketing despite using data. So we can just carry on doing campaigns. We can just build a website. We can just do a campaign. But what we want to be doing really is using data so that it really empowers us. So data itself becomes a real enabler for more effective marketing, better campaigns, more effective journeys through websites, getting the right customers to do the right things with us, really understanding what's going on. So data itself, it is an obsession. If you're going to use this, it can be, something that's really good to get obsessive about, but it's not the end game in itself. Okay, so this is very much seeing data as being an enabler for something. In other words, actually helping you to do the end game better and more effectively and more efficiently. And one of the key things when you're using data within marketing is that it's about action orientation. In other words, it's about figuring out what kinds of data, which pots of data, what sort of information should you be gathering and analysing and interpreting that's going to allow you to do better actions. Now, the reason I'm sort of saying this, and I'm saying it in sort of 3 or 4 different ways in this early part of this webinar, is because it's really important to remember that when you start looking at marketing data and big data more generally, what you will find very, very quickly is that there is almost too much data. And for a lot of us, this is the challenge that we have, is that when you start looking into your analytics, your social media insights, your customer relationship system, some of your customer records, you find that there is so much data and you really don't know where to begin. So a really good starting point is starting with what kind of data is going to help me to do better actions? In other words, to improve something, to do something more efficiently, or to do something at a lesser scale, so actually do less, but actually get a better result or a better end point or a better effect from what I'm doing. So action orientation, starting with how is my marketing life going to be different from using data, is a really good starting point. So rather than just jumping straight in head first and thinking, whoa, there's all this data, what do I do? Is to actually begin by thinking, what kind of data would actually help me to do things a little bit better? Okay, because great marketing both begins and ends with great data. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of us think about data as being the way that we measure something. Okay, so it is the key performance indicators, it is the analytics, it's when we do a post in social, we want to find out how that post has performed. So a lot of us just naturally, as marketers, migrate to the end point and start looking to analyze our data. But great marketing also begins with data as well. So actually using data that you might already have available to you. And obviously the data that you would have available to you if you're in a startup organization is going to be somewhat limited. But if you're in an existing organization or an existing business, you already have a plethora of different forms of data that you can start to use to shape up these kinds of actions and these kinds of opportunities to do your marketing more effectively or better. So think of data as being something that goes throughout your marketing journey, from creating some ideas about what you want to do, be it a campaign or a new product or just something new, all the way through to measuring actually what happened, what worked, what can I improve. So think of data as being your kind of friend, if you like, as you go through all of the different areas of marketing, both from planning but also from implementation. Data needs to underpin everything. If you're doing stuff that you're not measuring, maybe this is a time to say, well, actually, maybe I should be monitoring what I'm doing. If you're doing a campaign and you haven't got all the data there integral within the campaign, it's a chance to do it. New product introduction, for example, where's the data to assess whether or not you're doing the right thing? Because if you don't measure, you could be doing something else more effectively, or there could be something else that's going to give you a better return. With data, you'll at least know that you're at least part way on the right track of doing the most effective marketing that you can. So one of the things that it's really important to sort of be thinking about as we go sort of through this is the whole kind of sort of concept of, you know, where does this data come from? I mean, we've already talked about, you know, some of the things like social media, because a lot of us, you know, we're constantly on a day-to-day basis watching out for those likes, watching out for follows, watching out for new connections. So kind of it's already there on our radar. But when I look at sources of big marketing data, I'm looking at probably 5 different areas. Okay, now these are all interlinked, understandably, because if we've got a customer persona, we've got a customer journey, and we've got some marketing activity all planned out, we're probably already beginning the process of trying to link some of this data together. But the starting point, often as a really good starting point, is to say, well, okay, where is my data? Where am I going to be able to get some of this evidence? Now, if you've got a website, obviously the big daddy of all data, as far as your website is concerned, is probably going to be Google Analytics. So that will give you that flavor of the website as to everything that you could possibly want to know. Now, as we've said right at the start of this, probably too much. So we need to figure out a way of kind of narrowing this down, and we'll look at that in a moment. In your social media, most of us are doing social activity. So each one of these platforms, if you're not using an aggregator that draws it all together, each one of these platforms has got its own social insights. So there's another pot or resource of marketing big data. Campaign analytics. If you're using some form of campaign digital tool, it will have its own analytics element or widget or tool bolted onto it that will allow you to collect and potentially analyze some of the data, maybe report it back as well as part of a dashboard system. So already there's three very, very big pots of data, even before we start looking at, well, what other stuff's inside the organization as well. And when we turn our attention to that, CRM, customer relationship management, systems and platforms and tools have got a whole plethora of data in there related to how your customer has interacted with you, the kinds of things that they've bought, when they've bought them, the amount that they've bought, the amount of repeat purchases that they've had, any kind of impact of a particular campaign or particular sales visit, right down to the minutiae of an individual connection, an individual piece of contact with that customer. It's all in these systems. And of course, if you have an all singing, all dancing marketing or business information system that is starting to collate all of these things, then, well, potentially you're in quite a fortunate position, because already you can see the benefits, and you can see some of the outputs of starting to combine these various data sources into something that's going to allow you to begin to analyze and begin to make some judgments from the kind of data that you see. But what I would suggest at this kind of early stage in this whole kind of marketing data journey is to just go and have a look at each of these 5 areas. Now, some of them are going to be stronger than others. Some of them are going to be a lot broader, a lot deeper. Some of them can be fully comprehensive. And of course, each and every one of us has got a different organization and a different context. So some of these things, it might just be a spreadsheet. That might be enough for your organization, and that's fine. Others, it might be a very, very detailed system that goes back decades because of the organization that you're in. So we're all coming at this from a different perspective. The key, though, is to understand, where are my sources of data? Because that will start to get me to the next point. And the next point is to begin to think about, how can I use those data sources in some form of a process to understand where each of those things is going to be able to help me. Okay, so what I've got here is a 6-step data planning process. Okay, and what I'm doing with this is I'm starting to put a bit of a structure around where and how I'm going to use my data. Now, this is about planning. This isn't about the reporting of it. This isn't about the actions I'm going to take as a result of what I see from the data. This is about starting to assimilate the data, put the data together from all of those sources, and start the process of kind of figuring out what is important to look at and watch. Okay, now remember I said, let's begin with questions rather than with answers, because if you just combine all of that data into a great big pot, you will very, very quickly lose the will to live, because it will give you too many options, too many choices, and just too much noise. So the starting point really in the data planning process is to think about, what do I really want to know? What would be helpful to me? What kind of questions would I like to answer? And so take a really kind of strategic look. Think about kind of where you are right now within marketing, and think, what would be helpful to me to answer? What is that burning question that's kind of been at the back of my mind? And if I knew it, I'd be able to do something slightly differently. And every time you think of a question like that, note it down. This isn't a one-time activity. The beauty of this is that you can do this multiple times. As you get an idea of something you'd like to know, a little stone that you'd like to turn over and actually see an answer underneath, something you'd like to uncover from within the business, something that would kind of really inform the direction that you take and help you to make those correct decisions. Every time you think of a little question, note it down and run it through this planning process, because that question will probably fit somewhere in these 6 elements. So for me, the first element is to get some insights about the scenario and the situation that we're in, the context of our marketing environment. So macro, big stuff. What do I want to know from the macro environment in terms of data? Am I going to look outside for big market statistics that can actually impact me? I can't do anything about them myself to influence them, but they can impact me as a marketer and my organization. little bit closer to home, the micro stuff. What do I want to know about my environment, my sector, my industry? What do I want to know about my geography? So maybe the country or the continent that I'm in, depends obviously where you're marketing your products to. But the micro environment, that kind of almost touchable, reachable environment in which you and your organization sit. That micro environment, what data do I want to know? What little feeds could I bring in? What could I watch? What could I sense? What could I track on an ongoing basis? And also from within my organization, what kind of insights do I want? This is where the existing customer stuff comes into play. So kind of what insights do I want to know? What things would help me to begin answering questions about, well, where are my most profitable customers? Of course, that would be an amazing data feed. Which ones are the most easy to engage and actually keep in a conversation? Well, wouldn't that be good to know? These are the kinds of questions that you should be challenging your data with at this early kind of planning stage. Step 2 then is looking to analyze and prioritize the outputs from those things. In other words, looking at your macro, micro, and internal insights and just really thinking, what does this mean? How's my world different now as a result of knowing that little piece of data? In other words, actually analyzing, going deep into it and figuring out what does it really mean? Not just taking that kind of surface view, oh, look, there's a number that's just gone up and saying, hey, business, look, this number's just gone up. What do you want to do? Of course, well, how would I know what to do? Because it's just a number that's gone up. Your trick, the trick that you need to be really solving and figuring out and getting really smart with is figuring out why has that number gone up? What does it mean to me? In other words, actually analyzing the reasoning behind it and also the impact potentially it has. And then once you've done that a number of times, multiple times over those macro, micro, and internal insights, you can then start to prioritize, okay, which pieces of data, which pieces of information that I've analyzed now are going to have the most impact strategically, but also tactically in the short term? Which are the things that are going to hit us big? Which are the things that maybe open up, the best opportunities? Which ones are the most threatening to us, that if we were to ignore them, not keep monitoring and keep tracking them, they might come back to bite us? Got to prioritize those things higher than the rest. So this is not business as usual. This is about looking in your data, analyzing the data for things that could give you the biggest wins, the biggest gains, but also answering the biggest threats. And from that prioritization list, starting to set some targets. And this is where we start to think about getting a little bit more kind of action orientated. In other words, from knowing that data and those interpretations, what am I going to do differently? Because I've said already 2 or 3 times, it's all very well knowing this stuff, but the only really important data that you're going to be analyzing and interpreting and evaluating is the stuff where you can then actually take that on and do something differently. If you're not going to do something differently as a result of monitoring and measuring something, there's no point in monitoring and measuring it. So action orientated, setting targets about, okay, let's now, on the basis of that data, move this from here to here, or move that from there to there. You've got to then start to set some targets. And this might be at a campaign level. It might be at a customer engagement level. It could be at a customer satisfaction level. You can start to set some targets, maybe little bite-sized chunks to start with, and then maybe some bold, ambitious targets in the future. But start by setting some targets as a result of knowing the outputs of this data, analyzed it, turned it into intelligence. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to do things differently now you know those results? And then once you've set a few targets, and I would only suggest setting a few, try this process just with 1 or 2 or maybe 3, get some targets, get some clearly actionable things that you're going to do, and then align those with your strategy. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I actually mean is that you're going to now check those back against what your business is saying your marketing should be doing. Set it against some of those higher level, longer term goals that the business has set for you and marketing. And if it aligns, if those targets are aligned, then you can say, right, now we're going to set some tactics, some short-term goals of some actionable activity, a campaign, a launch, some kind of social sort of work, or maybe part of some digital activity through the website, whatever it happens to be, some tactics. If you find some of your targets don't align with the strategy, in other words, they've come at you left field as something that's very different to what you'd been planning, it's time to flag those up to the business. So have a word with your line manager, have a word with the MD, have a word with whoever is appropriate, and flag it up that you've spotted something that you've interpreted that might be making a difference. And it could be coming down the tracks, and the business really should be paying attention. This is the beauty of data. It allows you to do things, but it also gives you those early warning signs that you need to be paying attention. So it could be just something you're going to take on yourself and go away and test and optimize and improve, but it might be something you need to flag up to others. Doesn't really matter, but just make sure it's actionable, the thing that you're doing. And then, of course, what we're talking about here is change. So what we need is step 6 in this data planning process is key performance indicators. In other words, put some little indicators in, which will be little benchmarks, little milestones that will show how you're now progressing from A to B, from here to there. So the key performance indicators need to be these little flags that are going to show, probably red, amber, or green, as to the progress that you're making towards these targets that you've set. Now, of course, this is all very, very objective. It's all very numbers driven. And this is the importance of getting a real discipline and a habit around this kind of behavior. Because if you can, this is all about evidence that you can then play back to the business, play back to the sales team, play back to finance, play back to whoever you need to tell the stories in a much more credible, much more tangible, and a way that has much more gravitas really with it. So marketing now becomes a much more strategic and important element of the business, rather than it just being, oh yeah, they'll make it look good and they'll do all the lovely fluffy woolly stuff over there. They're great, yeah, they do all the digital and social stuff. They're not really an important part of the business, but yeah, they get on, they make us look good. We want to be looking good, but also doing it in a way that shows real value to the organization. So there's lots of really, really good reasons for spending the time within a process like this. Now, of course, at the moment, what I've done is I've kind of almost left you to your own devices to be doing this. But what we have available to us, and the reason for focusing in on Power BI, Microsoft product, here is just as a single example. Many other products are available, but I'm just going to focus in on this one for the purposes of this talk. There are products available and platform solutions, whatever you want to call them. The idea behind things like Power BI is that these become a dashboard for reporting and sharing those principles that I've just been talking about. So you're going to be doing the background work. You're going to be identifying some of the things that you'll be wanting to put into a dashboard like Power BI, some of the things that you'll want to begin to feed in as data sources, because you've done your background research. You've figured out of that plethora of data, you've figured out what are the big ticket items, what are the things that I really, really need and want to know. Those will be your starting points for something like Power BI. And Power BI is well, in theory, and particularly if you've got something like Teams or Office 365 running in your organization, then it's very, very kind of sort of integrated with that. So you can see the thing coming together as an analytics solution for the whole organization. So what I'm introducing here is the idea that, yes, whilst the start of the conversation probably is with you, because you've got the power of the initial data capture, very, very quickly and as fast as you can, you need to be pushing this out to others so that there's a collective ownership of the power of this big data within your organization. So if you start to introduce a platform or a system or some kind of sort of collective method of sharing this stuff, what you will find very, very quickly is that you will be then starting to work with the principle of layering the data. Okay, so what we're not doing here is just looking at single little pockets of data and saying, hey, look, here's a piece of data, and this piece of data means this, and then just leaving it at that. What you'll probably find very quickly, and this is going to happen very, very quickly once you start introducing other perspectives from the business. In other words, you bring HR in, you bring sales in, you bring customer service in, you bring product development in. They will have a slightly different perspective. So their layer of interest needs to come into the mix. Their layer of understanding, their context needs to come into the mix. So what we're doing here is we're starting to layer up the data with other things, other interpretations, so that we can understand from a collective sense how this data is going to be of value to us as an organization. So yes, of course, from a marketing perspective, we want to be able to do better campaigns, get the right customers, get the right products to those customers. But from a business sense, from an organization's perspective, they will be wanting to layer on other stuff, and that could be resources. They might be wanting to layer on some kind of financial model on top. In other words, it's all very well, Mr. or Mrs. Marketer, you want to go over and see that customer, but actually we know as a business that customer over there is very expensive to serve. So there's a kind of a financial kind of perspective or another layer that goes on top. So the idea of layering the data, not just taking data as a single unit of information, it starts to get some real power inside the kind of interpretations that you're going to be doing around the way that the data forms. And this leads us beautifully into how to then begin to use and manipulate the data and start to use data, not just as information, but as real intelligence, as a real kind of facilitator of discussion. Some of the best uses of data that I've seen, certainly in my marketing life, has been when data has been at the center of a good team meeting. In other words, you've had a piece of data that's been visualized, and Power BI does this beautifully, and you can see in the visual here, you can put sort of visual representations around, where are your products being sold? From a geography, where are we seeing most profit, if you like, from certain customers? The size of the blob shows maybe profitability or sales in a particular geography. You can overlay that with maybe each of those blobs can become a little pie chart, so you can see a product split down by customer or down by particular geography. There's a million ways you can cut this data. That's not the important thing. The important thing is, as a marketer, introducing the concept of data visualization into your organization. Because as soon as you do this, it's a common language. You move away from talking the language of marketing speak, because we do, let's face it, we do talk marketing, and we start to move into something that actually everybody can interpret. And you start to put, if you were to put this particular visual at the center of a meeting and say, this is our agenda for this meeting. We're not going to have a written agenda of bullet points. We're actually going to use this visual to start talking. What does this visual mean to us as a business? How can we then start to interpret it? We can turn the data into kind of insights by having discussion. So data visualization allows you to take different perspectives and really get into a proper conversation. And from that conversation, glean some insights. What does this data really mean to us? But also then, really importantly, how can we turn that into action? In other words, salesperson, you see this data, what are you going to do differently? Marketer, how are you going to interpret this and do something differently? HR, how are you going to source people on the ground to be able to serve this? How are you going to recruit the right people in that new area? Look, down there, that we haven't actually been servicing in the past, but we can see there's an opportunity. Let's get people in on the ground there. All of these conversations become available to you when you start to visualize the data. I can't stress how important this is. If you just are pushing out reports from your marketing activity that's just got tables and data and boring stuff like that, the business will treat it as tables and data and boring stuff. Start to think about how you can visualize what you do, because you will find that this will take your reporting and the conversations that come out of that, and also your credibility as a marketer, onto the next level. Visualization is a really key skill, and certainly something that can be really, really constantly powered and fueled on an ongoing basis by the data that you put in. So there's some huge opportunities here to make change. And we've said here, it's about beginning with questions, not answers. Don't go looking for the answers. Think about the questions that you want answered. Think about those gaps in your knowledge that you'd love to fill. Think about those things that you've just got this little inkling that there's an opportunity out there. And be thinking about the changes that you're going to make as a result of the interpretation of the data that you see. Be willing to have conversations, get around the table, share just a little piece of information and say, but guys, what does this mean? What do we think? Let's talk about this. Because you'll find that somebody around that table, and of course it could be a virtual table right now, but what a great reason to get onto another Zoom call that's got a really visual focus, gets away from just those dry old meetings. Let's use data and information to really empower, really, really good, strong commercial meetings. And constantly, as we think about the outputs and the actions that come from them, let's be open enough as organizations to be agile and receptive to the change that these things are going to stimulate for us. Try different combinations of data, see what happens, see if we make this decision versus this decision, how did that then result? So next month when we come back and we start to interpret again, what does that mean to us? Data is a really, really empowering thing if we choose to keep the blinkers off, and we choose to take it on the chin if we get it wrong, and we choose to be able to adapt. The most agile organizations, those who have really responded well through the pandemic, have been the ones that have been constantly listening and adapting to the change in the data that they've seen. And they're probably now monitoring and measuring different data. So this is the beauty of it. It's a constantly evolving feast of things and opportunities for you. So those organizations who just make a marketing plan at the beginning of the year and then turn off from everything until they've finished the end of the year and then realize, we're completely detached from everything, the reality around us, they're the organizations who are not going to succeed on the other side of this. Organizations who are agile, data-fueled, passionate about the conversation, visualizing everything, and turning the information that they see into good, continuously evolving business intelligence, those are the organizations who are going to win. And of course, as marketers, it gives us a really strong strategic position going forward. We're not just the recipients of the decisions that are being made in isolation, we're the ones driving the agenda, driving those conversations. And it gives us a huge opportunity to kind of really own the bringing it all together. The digital dashboards that I've often talked about when we've talked about things like Google Analytics and social insights and monitoring all the behaviors through the customer journey. And I've constantly mentioned this idea of a digital dashboard. But of course, you can own it if you can get a business or organization-wide view of big data and how you're interpreting it and using it. You can own this dashboard. You can be that sort of conduit, if you like, for all the best decisions that the organization is making. And again, just to make a little nod back to Power BI as a dashboard, it is and should be a single source, maybe a single page, and they call it a canvas, and they use this idea of tiles, and that each of these little graphs or each of these little blocks of color is a tile that tells the story of the most important elements of the story. In other words, woven together, this gives you a lovely view of actually how you're doing. Data-driven, not interpretive, not based around vanity metrics, not just subjective, but something that's actually really tangible, that's actually showing the progress and the value that you're making. This is the really, really key stuff in marketing right now. And so I would suggest, really strongly, that you begin with that 6-stage process to try and see how you can weave some of the data that's already there at your disposal, almost certainly is, how you can kind of weave that together and then start to have a little play with something like maybe the free trial of Power BI or an equivalent. Start to put a little bit of data in and just see what happens, and then start to look at the digital dashboards and play around with some of these outputs and start to get others in the organization to play as well and see what they think, see what they feel about it, get some of their views as well. Because once you start doing that, you're going to be in a really strong position to kind of move forward together. And that's obviously the key benefit of this, is that it does really bring everyone together. And by putting that and maybe overlaying that onto something like a balanced scorecard, and I've got a visual on screen here, it allows different perspectives to be able to monitor, and different departments and different managers to be able to monitor their side of the equation. So you're kind of working together, but you're also inputting your own different perspectives. So you might be owning the customer, finance brings the finance in, learning and growth comes in through HR. Maybe there's a production or sort of manufacturing element of your organization, they can bring in the process element, all working together on these visions, the goals, the strategies, but strongly and heavily data driven. That is the real key here behind all of this. So that's really, really the fundamental building block that allows you to kind of make this thing a reality and bring it out of the textbooks and make it a really commercially valuable thing. So your next steps, I would suggest, is to jump into these 6 steps. Get some insights, understand what kind of pots of data you've already got available to you, analyze them to your heart's content, but prioritize. Pick out 3 or 4 and set some targets for those. And those could potentially be the low-hanging fruit, the things that you could get some quick gains from, or the things that are going to align most closely with your strategy. In other words, give you that longer-term value and advantage over potentially your competitors. Think about creating a few little tactics around them. So what are you going to do today to start to deliver against these targets, and clearly set some key performance indicators, those little flags that will show you how you're making progress to hitting those targets. And I think that is obviously a great way of starting. Loads of tutorials available. If you go to Power BI, I'm just going to stick with that one as the example here, because obviously it's integrated with Office 365, which obviously a lot of people listening and watching this will be able to have access to. So go and have a little play with some of the tutorials on there. They've got templates, they've got how-to guides. Pop some data into the free trial, and if it works, if it sticks, maybe it's something you want to invest in. If not, it's been a great learning experience for you, and go away and trial some others. So that would be my next steps recommendation, if you like. It is about getting started. The principle is only a principle. You've got to start digging out some of the data that's available to you from some of those sources I've already mentioned. And if you do that, you stand a really great chance of providing some real evidence around the activities that you're doing. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I'm more than happy now to take either using the Q&A box or the chat facility. So send me a direct message or pop it into the open Q&A. If there's anything that you'd like to ask or discuss, we can open that up too. So I've got a question. First question that's come through is, could we have multiple dashboards measuring different things? Well, I think fundamentally, the answer is absolutely yes, you can. And I think if there are different perspectives, maybe different departments, and you're a larger organization, then I think there could well be some real benefits of doing that. I think certainly my initial guidance would be that less is probably more in terms of getting started. I think if you can prove the concept, I'm a big believer of starting small and then scaling things. So I would suggest probably playing with one dashboard and really getting sort of to know it intimately and get some value out, and start to kind of almost use that as your sort of trainer of the rest of the organization, if you like. So get people familiar with it, start to create some really good habits, and become, get it sort of integral within your decision making and sort of day-to-day activities, and then maybe scale up, and then maybe measure different things. I think that could be a really useful way of doing things. Another question that's come through directly to me is, how do we use the balanced scorecard within our key performance indicators? Okay, so I'm just going to go back a little bit for those of you still looking on the slides that I've got available here. So the balanced scorecard is one of these kind of sort of organization-wide scorecards, or sort of check sheets, if you like. Each one of the elements that you put into your balanced scorecard is it's a very, very small sample of a key performance indicator. In other words, each one of these is a KPI. And by saying that, what we mean is that if you choose to do this on a color-coded basis, each one of the elements that you put into one of the 4 blocks here will be something that's important to you as an organization. So it's a key performance indicator. So those three words are really important. We just have KPIs as a bit of a throwaway term, but actually they really mean something. They're key things to the organization. The organization really has to know on an ongoing basis. They're measuring performance, properly measuring the performance, and they're indicators. So they should be flagging up to you very, very quickly and easily if something needs a bit of attention. And that's, of course, when it moves from green to amber. If it turns from amber to red, then it's a real showstopper. The business needs to jump on it right here, right now, because it's going to have a fundamental impact on how you're going to be able to operate. So I'm a big fan of the green, amber, red, because that allows you then to really identify very, very quickly the things that you need to be, sort of devoting attention to. And the really nice thing about integrating your KPIs within a balanced scorecard is the idea that this is shared across the organization, because it is very, very broad in terms of its perspective. The financial bit is all about finance. The customer bit is all about customer. There's no blurring of the lines here. These things are very, very specific and very, very targeted. So for me, KPIs reported back in a balanced scorecard with putting your vision and your goals and your strategy at the center so that everybody knows everything ultimately is playing back to those things, because otherwise how can an indicator indicate something if it's not indicating against something? So it has to play back to vision, goals and strategy, or you can define what's at the core heart of there. But as long as those KPIs are showing the progress you're making to hitting those things, then it's a good balanced scorecard. So I would suggest, yeah, that is probably the best way and the neatest way of putting your KPIs in line with your scorecard that is meaningful for the rest of the organization. Another question that's come through on direct message: can I re-say what I meant by macro insights? Okay, so for those of you who aren't so familiar with the macro stuff, so the difference between macro and micro. So macro is the big picture. So this is stuff like the impact of COVID. This is stuff like Brexit. This is stuff like societal trends, technology trends, big picture, big ticket stuff. And I always sort of use the analogy, it's stuff that can affect you, but you can't affect it. So it's the real big picture stuff. The difference between that and micro is much more closer to home. So it's stuff that's going on in your sector. So for example, if you're in the pharmaceuticals industry right now, well, we know what's going on in your sector. It's all about vaccination. So that's where all the attention's going. So there's a big trend going on there. The internal stuff is obviously internal to your organization, and competitors typically fit in the micro. So if you're looking to get some data, and this will be probably third-party data, it could be statistics, it could be industry reports, it could be from your industry's trade association, whatever it happens to be, the chances are that's going to be in the micro area. The big picture stuff, these big sort of KPMG reports and the like, the Harvard Business Review kind of reports, that's up at the macro level in most cases. So that's the difference between the two. And as a marketer, really, it's your responsibility to keep your eyes on both. You should have your finger on the pulse of the macro stuff, because you don't know when that's going to impact on you. The micro stuff is much closer to home. If you're not watching your competitors, not necessarily just emulating them, but watching them, you're missing a trick. So data from both of those sources, as well as then matching it with some of your internal data, your customer data, your performance data. If you can blend all of those three things in together, then that is great insights that you can then start to analyze and prioritize. So that's why I kind of labored that point on that point one there in terms of the sources of data. Some of it's macro, some of it's a bit closer to home, and obviously you've got your internal data as well. I did mention right at the start is if you're in a startup organization, or maybe you're looking to break into a new marketplace, it's worth starting at the macro level and then drilling down, because obviously you won't have internal insights because you're brand new, you're a startup. So do your deep dive into the macro and the micro first. And if you do that, then that at least gives you a nice platform, a nice baseline from which you can start to see whether there's a market opportunity. There may or may not be. And if part of the decision process, shows up that the fact there isn't an opportunity, well, then that was time well spent, because you could have saved your organization a lot of time, a lot of resource, in chasing something that didn't really exist. So data can help you at all ends of the spectrum. And as I said, it can help you upfront, and that's really what's happening in points 1 and 2 there, but it can also help you after the event, monitoring those key performance indicators, seeing the tactic outcomes, and then just kind of balancing those two things together so that you can then see continuous improvement throughout. So when you come to do the next strategic marketing plan, or you come to do your next tactical plan, you're so much more powerfully armed with information and intelligence to do some better decision making. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. So thank you for those questions. That's really good. If you do have any others, or if you're having any questions at all and you're watching this on catch up, use the message facility at the bottom of the particular broadcast, the podcast, or the video, and I'll do my best to answer. So this has been Power BI and the use of marketing data in your marketing decision making. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to catching up with you again on a webinar very, very soon. Thanks for coming, thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.